From Unspoken, help is on the way. And is it? Well, for the federal budget, it may well be for South Road, that corridor between the southern suburbs of Adelaide and the northern suburbs. Getting it built has been a long-range thing that has been part and parcel of folklore. We're going to build South Road. We're going to fix South Road. Progressive governments over the time and successive governments have decided and then not done anything. Well, this federal government's decided to put a line in the sand and put $2.6 billion into South Road from the federal budget. And for South Australians, they'll probably go, well, that's a good thing. But when you look at this spending against the rest of the nation's road infrastructure spending, it's an incredible amount. A quarter of the nation's infrastructure road spending announced by the federal government in the budget, this additional money as opposed to what may have already been committed, a quarter of it is for South Road in Adelaide. And Ricky Lambert joins me on this point. Ricky, how do you see the government's balance here in the context that across South Australia people will be really glad that South Road's getting fixed? You know, they're putting a freeway thing right between the whole thing, like Perth's got and like Melbourne's got and like Sydney's got, you know, tunnels or whatever it takes, let's just do it. But it's all federal money, and it means that our regional roads actually are going to suffer through a lack of funding, surely.
Well, the Queensland Treasurer Cameron Dick jumped up and down when the funding was leaked, as it tends to be before the budget night speech, where we've got South Australia and Victoria getting 2.6 and 3 billion respectively, Queensland only getting 1.2 billion. And he accused both South Australia and Victoria of being city-states. And certainly announcements like this and the way that South Australia is governed, South Australia certainly is functioning like a city-state under the Marshall government.
Well, it's interesting because if the federal government's giving the money to the Marshall government, in effect, it means the Marshall government has less pressure on its budget. It is an election year for both the federal government and the Marshall government in South Australia. The southern suburbs would appear to be the area where the election in South Australia is going to be won or lost back to Labor, with Malinauskas being very, very strong and pushing hard in the southern suburbs. Is this pork barrelling for the South Australian state government to effectively put out that it's electable at the next election?
Well, I think the answer to the Queensland criticism is that there is a state election coming up next March in South Australia, and that's why SA's got a more generous lashing of funding this time around, because you've got a Liberal national federal government and a Liberal state government. They're very happy to help out. And let's not forget, Nicole Flint is stepping down in the seat of Boothby in the southern suburbs, and the federal government seem to have a problem with women. These issues do overlap, federal seats and state seats, and how the federal Liberals are travelling versus the state Liberals. So I think they'll be making a lot of noise about how the Liberal Party has put money into fixing South Road, but it's at the expense of regional South Australia. When you rule out the remaining 0.6 of a billion or $600 million, there's not much going out to regional roads.
And looking at that, you've just mentioned, we talked yesterday about the Truro bypass, $160 million. We're going to have a road that will bypass the little town of Truro. About 600 people are affected there, but I think that's something that has long been looked at. Then $140 million for the duplication of a part of the Augusta Highway, remembering that that amount of money is only going to do a small section and do the planning and the buying of land and so forth to enable it to happen. $64 million for the Strzelecki track out in the outback, which in effect is a good thing for freight and transport from the outback of Australia. Then $40 million to councils over 2 years for local road funding. Now, councils might be rubbing their hands together, but there are 42 country councils in South Australia, and there are, of course, then all the city councils which would want to avail themselves of federal government money, the $40 million. I would say about $500,000 in funding would go to councils, each council, over the next 2 years. So maybe $250,000 in additional road funding. It's not a big amount for councils at all.
It might pay for a couple of access ramps for pedestrians in places, but not much more. The real problem here is that Malcolm Turnbull muddied the waters when he funded passenger rail with federal money, and now anything goes. And the main South Road project is not about freight. It is about helping metropolitan commuters get to and from the CBD. What we're not seeing here is a focus on the Truro bypass scenario with Sturt Highway is all about building towards, and in this budget there is funding towards research researching how they are going to move freight by road, I might add, through Sedan-Cambrai, from Murray Bridge and from the southeast of South Australia to get to Port Adelaide. So the actual freight focus for the federal government is to bypass Adelaide pretty much altogether, and yet 2.6 of South Australia's $3.2 billion in this budget is going into north-south corridor in this metropolitan Adelaide.
Yeah. Which is not national road in that context. It's actually a state road, unlike, say, the Sturt Highway, which at least is a national highway. I can see some benefit there. And I guess if you're on the rail side of it and you thought that Murray Bridge could perhaps have a line built up through Sedan-Cambrai, back around the top of Accommodation Hill and down to the port so that Melbourne and Darwin freight could be taken off and so forth, then I'm sorry to say there is no money for that kind of freight here. It is a very interesting South Australian component to the federal funding for roads.